This is a very large center wheel for the Solaris clock, 13 3/4 inches in diameter, made of segmented wood. My experiment was to see, would this remain flat? Is it going to bow, warp, split because of change in weather or humidity? And I'll let you know about that in another video. In the meantime, let me show you how I went about making this wheel. These are the blanks for the center wheel of the Solaris clock. We're going to take this stack of wood and we're going to reduce 92.5% of it to shavings, sawdust, and scrap. And we end up with a finished product center wheel that weighs less than half a pound. We're going to take these 9 pieces and glue them together on the jig. We're going to end up with 2 half wheels. I've changed my process or procedure for making these a little bit. I take my template, put it on my wood stock, draw around it with an ink pen, rough cut it on the bandsaw. Seems like no matter how hard you try, whether you use a planer or whatever, you're not going to have one face exactly parallel to the other. So pick a side and stick with it. I square that face to the bottom. I sand this flat and square to the bottom. And when I assemble these, I make sure that I can always see some of the ink mark or mark that side so that you always know that that's up. You want the side that you've squared to be on the bottom as you assemble these. The other thing, I don't worry too much about these being exactly 20 degrees. If they're a little bit more than 20 degrees, that works out pretty well. I have the 9 segments that I've joined together. I've made 2 of them. You can see that these 2 faces are not flat. I'm going to take these, I'm going to run them through the planer. Run it through this way, turn it around that way, flip it over, turn it around this way. I'm going to take this, I'm going to run it across the joiner to square this face with one side, the bottom side. I'm going to do that on both of them. I'll glue that together and clamp it. Now this will be too big for my planer, so then I'll start using my drum sander. And I'll true that up a little bit. I'll put a hardwood dowel in the center. And I'll finish sanding that to the final thickness, which is a 1/2 inch. This is a final product. This particular one, I used a commercial carpenter shop sander to do this because my drum sander wasn't done yet. And I made 3 of these blanks. This gap is kind of interesting. Right now it's about 3/32 of an inch wide. It started off as about a 64th. This has gotten as wide as 3/16. The glue in there appeared like it was foamy. It didn't really adhere to the wood at all. So I scraped it out with a tool and I went in there with a little sandpaper and just cleaned up these joints. What I intend to do is to take a wedge and stick it in there and glue it and then sand it off. I only need to glue this part here. So when I glue that wedge in there and then sand that down flush, I'm going to take my paper pattern, try to position that to where most of that area is going to be cut out. And only this piece here, where the teeth are, is where that section of that wedge will be glued in there. And I think that'll be a perfectly usable blank. When you sand this, you're running this through the sander, you do not want to just sand on one side because this wood will get hot and this will start to cup. So when you sand one side, you turn it over, you sand the other. Keep alternating sides and direction. And then I think it's a good idea, as soon as you have this sanded, put your pattern on here and cut out all the big openings, sand them, machine them, and then let the blank sit before you go working on all the gear teeth. Even if you have an 1/8 of an inch or 3/16 of an inch gap, if you spread that around over these 18 wedges, that's not a whole lot of movement. And we know that the tolerance between the pinion and the wheel teeth is fairly loose to allow for movement of the wood. But this is an experiment, and I'm going to complete these two wheels, let them sit in the house, and observe if they undergo any adverse changes. My stick is just a little bit too long, and that's fine. I'm going to push that into the wheel and sand it off. That gives me a little resistance to sanding. I can creep up on that mark. It's this line out here that we're going to sand to. Well, fine. That's pretty good. You're going to have to adjust your stick back and forth to sand to that line anyway. These paper patterns, they stretch a little bit as when you glue them onto the wood. I've found they're never exactly 100% a perfect circle, but there's enough tolerance between the pinion and these wheels to allow for that slight difference and variation. I'm going to go to the scroll saw and I'm going to put a sanding stick in it. I'm going to smooth out all these surfaces, and I'm going to round over this edge a little bit. I'll come in here and heat this up gently with a heat gun, pull this paper pattern off, and then I'll wipe this down with a little mineral spirits and take that adhesive off of there. And then this wheel's done. I took these blanks, they were a 1/2 inch. I glued the pattern onto the wood blank. I immediately cut out all these large areas. I sanded them smooth, rounded over the edges on the router table, and then I set these on top of a glass top coffee table. And I just looked at them for about 1.5 months. I didn't see any drastic changes. They didn't warp or try to split. I went ahead and I cut these teeth out. These teeth have been cut out for about a month. So it's been about 2.5 months since I made these blanks. I have one little spot right here. It's a hairline crack, and it goes from the inside of this circle to the hardwood center dowel. And that has not changed in 2 months. So I think that's stabilized. When I get everything else done, I'm going to put a little piece of cellophane tape on both sides. I'm going to push a little epoxy down in that crack and sand it off and call it good.